Ah, dude, I've been traveling a lot. It's good.
Fix my All right, here we go. The opener, and then we'll have Ivan Raiklin here for see what's been going on with him in the recent days. He's been awfully busy, guys. Here we go. Fingers crossed.
Think about it. Everything's polluted. The environment, the government, the schools, you name it. We're on 92 FM tonight. It feels like a nice, clean little band. No one else is using it. Price is right.
Are you listening to this?
Yeah, of course.
Now we can talk to him in 3 minutes. What's up, guys? What's up, guys? We got Ivan Raiklin in the house here. We're going to be talking about all kinds of good stuff. I want to talk about the Electoral Count Act some more and have more of a frank discussion on that. I want to hear more about his history, what got him to join, and what got him to into the military the way he was, and in the recent times since. We ran into him over in Wisconsin. and about so that was pretty interesting. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then more recently, Mike Mandel's event and other stuff. So stand by. Kicking it off in about 2 minutes, guys.
It makes a hell of a lot more sense than blowing your brains out.
FCC, you know what that means?
This phone call's been traced.
I like the idea that a voice can just go somewhere uninvited, like a dirty thought in a nice, clean mind.
Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent. Free and independent.
Free and independent indeed. As I keep Ivan here to show the behind the scenes antics of me trying to get a show kicked off here. Good to see you guys out there today. Much love and God bless you all. It is Sunday, August 20th, and we have Ivan Raiklin in the house for another conversation with Abe. This is what, the fourth edition now I think we've had. So welcome to the party, Ivan. I'm glad you're here. Do me a favor when you guys get time. Hit uncensoredabe.com. Bookmark the website. You can find everything Uncensored Abe. You can find out how to watch the show directly from the website. Learn how to get a hold of me. You can find the different streams from the Foxhole, D-Live, Twitch, Rumble, Cloud Hub, Tiger Network. Kick never freaking works, but we're trying to stream over there as well. Anyways, there's the previous special guest, Coach Mel, in the house last time for a conversation with Abe. And today we have Ivan here. I'm looking forward to that. Don't forget, you can find the previous show content, stuff you need to see, such as the last time I saw Ivan, I think, was in one of the Wisconsin decertification rallies or the one of those events in Wisconsin. We did so many out there, but Seth Ketchum was also in Wisconsin. So there was a bunch of times where I kind of ran into him left and right out there. It was a lot of fun. The good old days of the battlegrounds in Wisconsin, where all the grassroots came together with our national leaders and voices to try to bring truth to the people. It was an amazing time. It still happens every day. If you can help keep the lights on, cash at PayPal, Patreon, buy me a coffee or help you can do that, I could use some help keeping the lights on. It's tough being an independent journalist out here these days. You can also go to mypillow.com/Abe, use discount code Abe, and you can get yourself some cool stuff, help support me, and help support Mike Lindell's election integrity efforts. We're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. How to get a hold of me, link trees, email addresses, and all that good stuff at the bottom of the website, as well as how to mail me something. If you want to mail me something to my P.O. box, you can do that. I like getting mail, considering it's been lonely around here these days. You know what I'm saying? Rumble crowds out there lurking and listening. Thanks for being here today, guys. Disco Daphne, first in the house. Thanks for everything. Always trying to get the links out there and let everybody know when we're live. If you guys can, share the link with your favorite social media. Let everybody know we're live right now. I appreciate you all very much. Cherokee's guys in the house as well as Grafted in the Fallen One and many others over there on Rumble. Pill crowd is always strong as hell. Ivan, if you've never heard of pill.net, this is the digital soldier foxhole, brother. This is where when all of us were dehumanized, demonetized, and sent to our little own corners of the internet, this is where we came together with some great patriots like Robert Beals. I'm sure you heard his name in the news recently and maybe ran across him in your recent travels. He helped this platform become what it is, and it is only going to be the best platform out there going forward. It is the only free speech platform out there, and that's why we love him so much. And the other reason why we love him is if you guys want to help your streamers, want to help support them, help keep the lights on, the vast majority of your dollars on pill.net goes to the streamer, not to the platform. Unlike Amazon, unlike Rumble, all the others, the vast majority of your dollars, not the vast majority, but a good percentage of, whereas here it goes to reinvest in the platform to help free speech, help the streamers create something special, and we appreciate you all very much. Creative writers in the house. Amazon, good to see you out there, brother. Dem Turned Red, the Fallen Ones over there lurking and listening as well, checking in with the fam over there. Good to see you, brother. Lord Mad Dog's in the house. Good to see you. Chris Doom, good to see you, bro. Good to see you out there. And many others lurking and listening. The D-Live crowd's always lurking and listening. Of course, I got Twitch up over here because Twitch is a pain in the ass, and I logged out on accident. Now I can't log back in because it's a long story. But anyways, Twitch crowd's out there lurking and listening, and good to see you guys out there as well. Thanks for being here today, guys. Appreciate you all very much. I want to get Ivan in here today right off the bat. Just hop to it. I've already kept him here long enough watching my antics in the background. Let's just go ahead and get into the discussion and get some reminders about who we're dealing with here. Because this isn't your average schmo that's over here coming in to hang out here with the Uncensored family today. This guy knows his shit. He's a top-notch patriot. He has created a trail of people that is almost bigger than mine, as far as trolls and people who love him and people who hate him. So that's why I want to have you on the show. Because, I mean, if you can match my trail of people who love and hate me, then we're onto something here today. You know what I'm saying? Let's
flesh out the weeds, baby. We're going to aerate and thatch the garden. Let's figure it out.
But the best part is we had an unbelievable discussion back in the day while we were up in Wisconsin. And, you know, I was in Wisconsin. I was in the grassroots level. Every chance I've got involved in the grassroots level since 2007. So that's me, bro. I've been trying to get the word out and trying to fight for a very long time. And so we had a great group, and I was a very small part of it, but I helped elevate their voice by bringing a camera and a microphone to all these different events. And then we ended up as a team, as an election integrity team, we've all come together in a very beautiful way, if you ask me, guided by God, is we were able to get the decertification discussion on the national scale. And I was very proud of that from a small platform level and a small activist level, because we were clamoring for it for months. And then finally we were able to get that discussion on the play. So I just want to thank you personally from the grassroots activists and for those of us out here who have been in this fight for a long time.
I haven't stopped, by the way, and that's why they hate me. So I'm still continuing that effort. In Arizona, I think we still have a little bit of a flame that's getting rekindled. If you haven't noticed the last couple of days, I think they're having a discussion into the next legislative session to potentially go ahead and let me back up and say, did you have a chance to take a look at my testimony in Arizona in February?
Yeah, I watch everything, and we amplify it on this channel too. So
awesome.
As much as
yeah, so I mean, I was down there, and it looks like this new Congress, the 118th Congress, oversight and judiciary weaponization, the COVID select, all those committees have essentially proven at this point what I had indicated back in February. And it's not because I'm like any smarter than anybody else. I just happen to spend a lot of time and energy collating all of this evidence. And the same conclusions are being had by those that have subpoena power. So I'm glad that's taking place. And hopefully, Arizona legislature, if you're listening in, and you know who you are, ladies, please take that bold step, because the men aren't doing it.
Yeah, I think we have a possibility of at least continuing to advance this discussion and raise awareness. Let's go back a little bit. Tell me a little bit about Ivan. This is how we usually kick it off with. I try
Yeah.
to disarm you a little bit. Tell me who's Ivan in high school?
Oh, in high school, I used to wrestle in high school. So yeah,
Looks like a wrestler.
Cedar Falls,
Looks like a guy
Iowa.
who used to kick my ass.
I was a Cedar Falls Tiger. Cedar Falls, Iowa. I used to wrestle in high school. That's probably, I mean, other than getting not the best of grades, that's probably my primary focus was the wrestling component, which, took a lot of energy and focus because you had to make weight. Very competitive, obviously, in Iowa to make the team and then also to be competitive on the team. So that basically was the entire focus of my high school years that I can remember.
What kind of what's your family like? Do you have a family of prior military?
No, so my parents fled the Soviet Union in the 70s, in 74. So mom, dad, brother, older brother, and two older sisters. So my brother was 3 years old? No, excuse me, 10 months old when he came to the States. And my sisters were, I think, 4 or 5, 5, 6, respectively.
Wow.
So they were small, fled the Soviet Union. There's a little known law that most people aren't aware of is the Jackson-Vanik Amendment that allowed Soviet Jews to flee the Soviet Union that were being persecuted, and they were allowed into the United States legally. And that, luckily, I was born as the fourth child to my parents, Ernest and Augusta. Since you're asking,
so what was it like coming to a complete different? I mean, it had to have been tough, kind of working your way through America.
I was born here, so I was the lucky one out of the whole family, right?
Okay, gotcha. So by that point, you were gotcha.
Yeah, so they came in 74. I was born in 76. And so by then, I mean, for my parents, I can tell you that they didn't speak any English. My dad basically went and started off, really, I guess, not too wealthy, if you will, starting off from scratch, right? So learning English, and then he was an accountant for a local grocery shop, I think it was, in Manhattan. And then from there, he kind of leveled up, if you will, started learning English. And then a few years later, he ended up going to start his PhD at Columbia University. Didn't finish there. He ended up getting a scholarship at New School for Social Research, and then got picked up to be a professor at the University of Northern Iowa. So from 0 to 6, I was in New York City. And then he moved us up to upstate New York, about 2 hours north of the city, while he was still studying and going to school and working full time. And then in 1986, so 10 years, when I was 10, he finished his PhD, got picked up to be a professor at University of Northern Iowa, and we moved out there. And I would say that my formative years were in Iowa. So think of work ethic, very nice community, people there. Even if you're politically on the different spectrum, it's just, I say that Iowa is the standard deviation of voters in Iowa are literally within one standard deviation, right? Almost the entire voting class. And so when you go beyond that standard deviation, it's literally the next standard deviation would be, mathematically speaking, probably like the fourth standard deviation. So very, very few people in the fringes.
You're speaking Russian to Common Core right now, so let's dumb down the discussion a little bit.
Yeah. So hey, I went to public school myself, so
right?
I had to catch up though. I had to make my
what standard deviation meant though. So tell me about when you joined. What motivated you to join, and how did you get into tell us about your military career. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so we talked about 86, and then I spent 14 years in Iowa. During that time, went to middle school, high school, and then I went to college. It was University of Northern Iowa, and that's when I joined the National Guard. So there's a program called the Simultaneous Membership Program where you join the National Guard as well as the Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC.
Yeah.
And so at UNI, I did that, got picked up, did a guaranteed reserve forces duty assignment, and then I became a military intelligence officer off the get-go, went to Fort Huachuca where you get your training. And then, let me back up. I did, in that simultaneous membership program, you get to go to be an enlisted infantry, for example, infantry. I went to basic training, infantry, but then immediately transitioned to be a cadet and then finished that off to become an officer. Started off in the military intelligence, And then from there, I basically went from part-time to starting to like it more and more, and then increased my activity within the military by volunteering for different assignments, different missions, different deployments. And then over a span of 20, without going into too much detail, over the span of the next 25 years, essentially from 1997 until last year, I had an opportunity to be in the intelligence profession across multiple disciplines: tactical, operational, strategic, human intelligence, counterintelligence, and analysis, and then also as a Green Beret and a military attaché. So I served as a military diplomat briefly, picked up a few languages along the way. Green Beret, served as a detachment commander in Central and South America, as a company commander in the Middle East, so countering ISIS, Taliban, MS-13, Russian aggression, and picked up Russian, Spanish, Arabic. Well, Russian at home, but Spanish, Arabic, and a little bit of French along the way. And amidst all that, when I wasn't on active duty, because I did active guard and reserve, I would say over the course of those 25 years, I probably spent in the collective about 12 to 13 years. I'd have to look on my thing. But essentially, imagine 180 days on average a year during those 25 years. So not quite reserved and not quite active duty, but right in that sweet spot. I mean, that's average, right? And so when I wasn't on duty, I picked up a law degree, focused on national security law, personnel security law. And last couple of years, basically, I saw the illegally conducted and then illegally certified election, followed by the illegal mandates and the mutilation training and everything else subsequent to that. I felt it was my time to, I wasn't going to bend a knee on any of that stuff. So the cultural psychosis of our entire United States federal government became really quickly anathema to my core principles, which are hinged upon the U.S. Constitution and defense thereof. And so I felt as though I would be much more effective stepping away and applying the necessary pressure externally, specifically on our civilian leaders that within our legislative branch, to give them the necessary fuel, arsenal, and motivation through the court of public opinion to then do a necessary body check against this the illegitimate and lawless executive branch.
And that's why we love you, and that's why I love you too. I got a lot of respect for you. There's a lot of people that question your motivations on things and stuff.
If I may, I think one thing that will address that is up until August of 2022, I had to play a very delicate stance, because if I was on reserve duty, well, that means I cannot do any political activity, anything remotely related to the Hatch Act, where you're talking politics, right? Whether it's support or against a political candidate or political party. So that discussion I couldn't do. In addition to that, I was a contractor. So 1 week in a month, essentially, I'm jammed up where my First Amendment is jammed up. Another 40 hours a week where I was an instructor at the Defense Intelligence Agency, I'm also jammed up where I don't have that limitation, but I still took it to the next level and acted as though during those 40 hours a week, I would not participate in any sort of political activity, if you will, even though I didn't have to according to the law. So I try to be delicate about that. And so you may have observed me and smelled something fishy. That's probably going to answer a lot of the why behind it. And so I wanted to make sure that I was operating as aggressively as I could, but within the constraints that I was under. In addition to that, as an attorney, obviously you have some constraints as well. And so I've took it to where now that I'm retired, the day after I'm retired, you could probably see a very heavy, aggressive, increased tone starting on about August 31st of last year.
I remember you telling me in Wisconsin, man. And I respect you for it. I mean, it's not an easy decision to make, and I have a lot of friends, family, and otherwise brothers and sisters from friends, that kind of thing, who have had to make difficult decisions with their lives too. But prior to the election, and prior to that stuff, is there you don't need specifics, but in general, an event or things that happened that you saw around you that also helped shape your worldview as far as what's happening here in America, or give us a little bit of sauce from your time in, not specifics, but an idea that would shape your worldview about what got you where you see the world today.
So I'd say two major things I think you're asking like, what's my why in this fight, right? It's easy. I can easily answer it in two big things. So number one, my parents fled the Soviet Union, as I started to talk about, and they were persecuted in the Soviet Union. One of the big reasons why my dad had to flee along with the family was that he was speaking truth to power while he was doing his master's degree. He was basically doing a thesis talking about how I think it was recent to that. Uh, Nikita Khrushchev just visited Iowa and saw that all the corn was growing there, and he came back and essentially said that from north to south in the Soviet Union, they're not going to now grow corn for their entire economy, essentially. Well, somebody that's a critical thinker is going to be like, well, you know what, that ain't going to really work out due to the climate and these other things. So why don't I write a thesis about how this is literally the stupidest idea ever in the history of humanity? And so as he's developing and writing a thesis, literally, essentially explaining that, the KGB caught wind of it, and there was a knock on the door, and they're like, "Where's your manuscript for your thesis?" Well, this was back in the day in the 60s. Well, I should say, yes, late 60s, early 70s, where the knock on the door happens, and it's not, you don't have a typewriter. You're basically writing it out, right? You might have a typewriter because this is way before computers. So the knock comes on the door, and my mom realizes what's going on, and so she's like, "All right, I'm gonna go ahead and light the match and then put it in the toilet," right? So they flush it down the drain. They don't have any evidence of the dissident material, if you will. And what happens is, instead of going to the gulag, his thesis chair was able to protect my dad from being sent to the gulag in Siberia. And he said, the best I could do for you is you're not going to be studying. You're going to have to leave university and you're on your own. That's the best I could do. So then he went back, and under that mindset, obviously he's bitter, and went underground and started essentially consuming underground bootleg, the Solzhenitsyn stuff, and trying to figure out like how does he get out of this situation? And again, through that Jackson Vanik Amendment and all that I mentioned. So my parents essentially experienced communism, whatever you want to call it, socialism, communism, the corrupt government that does not allow critical thought to take place, and instead you're persecuted for it. So I grew up knowing these stories, and I'm thinking to myself, all right, they came to the United States in order to be able to run away from communism. Well, it's not at our door right now. It's literally inside of the house. Yeah. And so if you're a proponent of the Second Amendment and you're entering my home, well, that's when the Second Amendment needs to be taught in person through experiential learning. And so I felt as though that is a component of what's going on in our country. And Alan, I'm not going to bend a knee. I know people say that hyperbolically. I think when you look in my detail of my past, I'm not going to bend a knee. I'm only going to go more aggressive, because I would rather be the first one to go down fighting rather than someone in the second tier essentially hesitating while they take us over. Number two, as I spent 25 years in the military, I saw what happened in 2017 on January 24th, 2017. That should be a date that everybody remembers. I see you have a painting over your left shoulder. On January 24th is when the failed before that, but the 4 days after the inauguration of President Trump is when Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe, the director and the deputy director of the FBI, the most corrupt, lawless, domestic terrorist organization in our nation, sent over goons by the names of Peter Strzok and Joseph Pientka III to go ahead and interview the biggest threat to that domestic terrorist organization that they have ever experienced since Martin Luther King Jr. And what do? They went ahead and, according to the notes of Bill Priestap, the Deputy Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at that domestic terrorist organization, they went ahead and deployed it those two agents in order to get him to lie or to get him fired. As soon as I sensed something, I didn't know the details that I'm explaining right now, but I sensed something was wrong. I served under him in the Defense Intelligence Agency from when he was the director from 2012 to 2014. And it wasn't direct. I wasn't a direct report, but I was a couple echelons down, and I observed how he operated. I've known about his background for some time. When an individual of that caliber, when you look at his background, his professional background, like flawless, impeccable background, when you see that our civilian leadership, to include these scum at the FBI, go after somebody of that caliber in order to protect their own corruption, guess what? I'm coming for you. I don't care who you are or how big you are. So that's my motivation. And when you look at my Substack, I only focus on exposing the highest level individuals within our executive branch. And considering I'm somebody with 25 years of insider experience, I have people that I know in every agency that I can fact check everything that I hypothesize about to see if they know anything that would discredit or discount any of my hypotheses before I put them out. And so that's why I think I've had a pretty decent track record of identifying and taking even bold leaps that many in our movement disagree with. For example, the whole Pence issue. I have not disclosed all of my sources as it relates to Pence, but I think at this point we're reaching the point where I'd be happy to disclose essentially almost everybody that I have in the inner circle of Pence, as well as the inner circle of Paul Ryan, that helped me shape my assertions of why I think, and at this point, almost certain beyond almost any doubt, that these guys are totally deep state, and we can lay that out.
Yeah, the one thing I've been very wrong about is Pence for sure. I mean, the arguments that were being made about Pence back in the day, I didn't agree with the arguments. But nowadays, you can kind of see the bigger picture of it all, and you see how he was protecting the establishment in his decisions. That was first and foremost in his mind. It wasn't just Mark Short. It wasn't his other advisors. And I thought it might have been even more his wife that was more involved in some of these decisions because of her connections. But, we'll talk maybe more about that later. I want to specifically discuss the vice president's powers on January 6th. We'll get to that in a second. But so transition now from, this analysis of what you see happening in the world. And I can see how that would very much shape your train of thought. It shapes mine too. I'm a Polak, so my family fled communist Russia as well. So we have that very much in common. But and it does give me a biased point of view against the Middle East, or the Middle East, against the eastern part of the Orthodoxy and all that stuff, and how it's been manipulated religion-wise. We've talked a lot about that stuff, but more importantly, it makes us want to stand for when we see the injustices happening to good people like General Flynn. And it's more than just him. There's been a whole lot of persecution on January 6th. There's journalists and people lives have been destroyed for daring to stand up for the truth. And one of my heroes in my life is Schrodinger, and his ideas were one of those as a philosopher and as a scientist that were shunned because they were too genius. Tesla, John G. Trump's files that recently came out on Open.Inc. These minds are all the ones that the power structures have shunned, and it's been a historical graveyard of people who have tried to fight the establishment. But hey, we're still here. Transition to Wisconsin. So we started to have the activism of, stopping the steal after the election. We transitioned it into getting decertification talks and stuff. But in the last 6 months, man, you have been all over the place. So just give me a little bit about where you've been over the last. You've been traveling like crazy. I want to get into the Lindell event and have your kind of insider vision of what you saw and what's your biggest takeaways. But before that, in the last several months, you've been all over the place, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to take a look at the calendar, but I've done quite a few things in DC over the last 6 months, because at the end of the day, I'm only 20 minutes away from where these hearings take place. So you probably see me a lot there, and you think that I'm everywhere. But it's essentially, physically speaking, it's only 20 minutes away where I roll in, park the car, pay $15 to park it all day, go in there, go ahead and conduct my deep state marauding, and then I'm out, right, by dinner.
Gotcha.
So not even like late lunch, if you will, depending on when the hearing
As
is.
quick as possible. Get me out of here.
Exactly.
I fell on January 6th too.
Right. And so even at the courthouse, same thing. It's only 20 minutes away, essentially, with no traffic. Last 6 months, I would say that I've definitely picked things up. I've been doing some speaking. I did a speaking event. Also, the documentary movie called We the Patriots, which we're only putting out exclusively if somebody does an invite, and we do a private screening due to the sensitivities of the content that's in there. But I've done that a couple times at different places, and this last week last week was pretty aggressive, where I went to Austin for the was it American Liberty Awards. I don't know if you're familiar with.
Yeah.
That was great. And then after the American Liberty Awards, went to Indianapolis to confront the president of the National Conference of State Legislatures, which happens to be the Speaker of the House in Wisconsin, Robin Vos. I had about a 15, 20, maybe 15-minute conversation with him. And then,
Really?
Yeah, I did. So
Freaking,
I can disclose some details on that, and then also the Lindell Summit. But I've had an opportunity to talk to quite a few consequential folks that everybody knows the name of this last week.
I mean, Robin Vos literally shoved it in the face of the grassroots activists by stealing his own election in 2020. It's a freaking joke, dude, what's going on in this country, man. And the Republican establishment in Wisconsin has really asserted their power and shown how the establishment can not just pull strings, but they can just, shove it in your face while they're doing it. What was the conversation with Scumbag Vos like?
Well, I started it off to put, because at the end of the day, I want to have a few minutes with him, right?
Yeah, he won't give me 2 minutes. I guarantee that.
Right. So I opened up with, and I was genuine. I said, Speaker Vos, I got to start with something polite and nice. I'm like, I'm going to be professional. It's like, please don't run away. Because it was at a reception. He was there. I put my hand out and I said, sir, thanks for at least giving us an opportunity. Because last year when we came and visited him, whether it was Jefferson Davis, there was a few other folks like John Eastman, myself, Dr. Frank, we basically made the case for him. And at the end of that, so I thanked him for at least giving us the opportunity, at least make the facade that he was listening to us, right? So I got to give it to them on that one. And then at the end of it, he walked out, and when he was asked by the media, do you think that there was widespread fraud? He actually said, yeah, he believed that there was widespread fraud, and even said, if I were a juror, I would rule that there was widespread fraud and, rule accordingly. Well, the component that he doesn't recognize is that when it comes to presidential and vice presidential electors, the state legislature is the jury, right? You know it. I know it. Everybody in the movement knows it. But for some reason, the Speaker of the House doesn't know it.
You just lost the debate. I'm just going to have to replay that clip. Go ahead. You lost the debate that I was going to bring you to with the Electoral College in Pence, but go ahead.
No, but we can go into more detail because I'm probably the only one that knows the component from December 20th until January 6th. And oh, by the way, if you read Trump's indictment in D.C., it references a tweet that he retweets. Operation Pence Card. Who was the original tweeter of that memo?
I know.
You're looking at him.
You got yourself in trouble with a tweet. Real nice.
That's when all my problems started. Or should I say, that's when all of Mike Pence's problems started.
Yeah. So tell me about, tell me a little more about Vos. I mean, because this guy, he did when we hand delivered.
Yeah, big takeaway. I got to give you the big takeaway of what he really talked about. I don't know why I said it this way, but this is how I interpret it. I asked him, can you convince me in America that your buddy boy, Paul Ryan, the $787 million that he handed over to Dominion Voting Systems in the form of a settlement, convince me and us that was not a bribe? Guess what his response was? He's like, Ivan, do you believe in capitalism?
Oh my God, are you serious?
The gall. And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't catch it at first, but I had to reflect back. I'm like, oh, he means crony capitalism. So what he means is, if this is how people vote on this side, and over here is how the exact replica electoral outcome is, in between all of that, there's what's called capitalism. And what he's referring to is the RNC, the faux news, deviant voting systems, LHS, and any other like company that manages and runs elections. So he's referring to the capitalism in between how people vote and what the outcome is. So the capitalism in between helps to shape and convince those over here on this end to believe what was manipulated in between before, from here.
You just made the argument the United States is still a corporation.
Yeah, so I don't know what he meant by that, but I interpret it as such, and I would be happy to have a subsequent conversation with him for him to clarify. But considering he has close ties. Obviously, he's besties with Paul Ryan. He's besties with Reince Priebus, right? And so think about it. If you're the Speaker of the House and dual-hatted as the NCSL president, you have an outsized influence on how elections take place, particularly with the Republican primary. Match that with faux news. If you can control who and what goes on to faux news, you have an outsized influence. Obviously, less and less because we're creating content like there ain't no tomorrow amongst the Patriot Network, so they're losing their influence. But then, in addition to that, you have the RNC, right? You have the debates. They're doing it on faux news. But last week, the reason why I went there was to literally get an understanding and intel, if you will, on the inner workings of NCSL and who are the power players. And obviously it's Speaker Voss, but more importantly is one indicator to help support my hypothesis of all these different relationships is you got to answer the question, who do you think invites the keynote speaker at the NCSL national, like the annual conference? It's probably the president,
Peter
right?
Thiel, or Peter Thiel, the Koch brothers?
No, but it's probably Robin Voss probably has an outsized say in that, right? As the president of that organization. So then would you agree with me that he was probably the one to invite Mike Pence to be the keynote?
Yeah, very likely.
Because Mike Pence was the keynote speaker.
That and the money behind him.
Yeah, so anyhow, so you got Mike Pence, Paul, Mike, who do you need in order to be able to manipulate and skew the Republican primary in your favor? What better people than the president of NCSL that can convince legislatures to change laws in your favor so that the electoral outcome is of your choosing? What better than the Paul Ryan, who sits on the board of faux news, who's able to then promulgate to convince the Republican voter, the China First Republican voter, I should say, in believing that the electoral outcome was legitimate? Who better than Reince Priebus, who's going to be running the RNC convention in August of next year? Who better than Speaker Voss, not NCSL President Voss, but Speaker Voss, who's going to be the one that probably decides rules and laws going into 2024 for the nomination process, not only for Wisconsin and the delegates, but potentially working with Reince Priebus on how they're going to accept delegates. And who better than Reince Priebus to influence, who used to be the RNC chair, who wants to be the RNC chair next term? Yeah. Who better than him in order to come up with a plan and scheme so that different states allocate their delegates in a manner so that it castrates President Trump? Yeah. And who better than the deep state's beloved one, who served 20 years as a politician on the right, Mike Pence? I mean, those are the 4 or 5 individuals you need.
He's been selected for sure to.
And then who better than Ron DeSantis to be his VP pick?
Yeah, exactly. It's the establishment. It became clear to me that once President Trump started going after China and they're taking advantage of American technology and that stuff, that the establishment in America was like, now you're hitting us our pocketbooks here. That's enough of this guy. Get him out of here. And they just said, get rid of him. And that's what they did. It was just ridiculous to watch. And I think it shocked a lot of us that were, even cursory viewers of what was happening out there. I think that, now you see it spreading more and more people are getting involved and understanding what really happened, which is the change between 2020 and now, as far as the American people really being aware of what really happened in 2020. It's been a shift unlike anything greater than I could have hoped as far as a truth seeker, man. I'm watching this and I'm just like, man, they can't deny it anymore. And how this is working itself out is awesome. And part of that plan, I think, also is Mike Lindell Name them all: Mike Lindell, Patrick Byrne, General Flynn, the True the Vote, any of these activists, yourself, and Seth Cashel and Ms. Donna and the Raccoon Army. All of these people have come together just because they see what's going on, and it's all about the election. It's been beautiful to watch. And
No, all of us are literally independent. We're doing our own thing, and then we're looking at something here. Whoa, whoa, whoa! As Dr. Frank says, that ain't natural, buddy. And that ain't natural, buddy, turns into, yeah, no one's stepping up. So I might just want to exercise my First Amendment to the max and then see where we can go with that.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I agree with you 100%. We streamed as much of the event. Mike Liddell and his team do a great job of keeping us informed as part of his platform of advertisers. I just appreciate everything he's done as far as raising awareness. And there's a lot of criticism on left and right of people who sit behind their phone and talk, but there's people out there that are investing money, time, effort, and doing everything they can to raise awareness, and it's making a difference.
He's doing more than any other single person nationally to essentially assist in the coalescing of those in this movement than anybody else. I mean, he spent so much time, energy, money, right? You can laugh at him, you can scorn him, you can do all this. Name one person that's doing more. It would be hard to identify anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, the Reawaken tour did a lot of work too. You and I both were ranting to each other at that event too. It's been a lot of fun, man. Raising awareness and being part of this movement and seeing the people on the ground has been just something really special. When you get to see the people and their passion, their knowledge, and who they really are, it really is inspiring to see these people. And that's been my experience through a lot of these events. And the first day of the Mike Lindell event was incredible, if you ask me, because I do more than most alternative media out there to show how state legislatures are changing laws, to see which states are getting rid of ERIC, to see which states are getting rid of Dominion, which counties are no longer doing machines, or I have moved to getting away from ranked choice voting and all kinds of things. So this is our main focus here in this channel, but I don't think the American people, and even those who are involved but aren't really paying that close attention, see how each state is really making change. And that was really inspiring for me to see, man. The grassroots on each state level is really making change, and the effort is making a difference.
No, it is. I mean, each state's grinding. I mean, I like to use New Hampshire as an example. Literally one person, Marilyn Todd, along with a couple other individuals back there in New Hampshire that aren't really public and vocal. All you need is about 3, 4, 5 people and just aggressive, and you can make some serious change.
They've done a great job in a lot of different places. I mean, they still have a lot of work, and there's still a lot of questions about how they're going to rig it. They're already talking about pandemic 2.0 and all this shit. So, they're going to make the effort to try to rig it. And
the reason why they did pick September 15th, I'd like to say it's because I'm coordinating an effort so that in Congress, when they come back from session or from recess in their districts, we're trying to push for the precursor Nuremberg 2.0 hearings, where it's going to be House Armed Services Subcommittee on Personnel and Readiness, along with COVID Select, and then potentially weaponization. And then we're going to make it not only a joint hearings, multiple, but also bicameral, where we're trying to get into the mix, into that conversation on the House side. Senator Rand Paul, right? Origins of CCP-19. Then the impact of the emergency use authorized products to include the DNA mutilating heart exploders, right? And that'll be Senator Ron Johnson. And maybe also bring into the mix Tommy Tuberville, who is also pushing back hard against this lawless, destroying children in the womb. He's trying to essentially defend that component. And then maybe we can get Ted Cruz in the discussion, because he was the one that promoted the amendment to reinstate military service members that were critical thinkers and did not want to participate in the mutilation of themselves, and they were pushing back against these lawless orders.
Yeah, there's some great doctors and specialists out there too that have the inside knowledge and understand what's really at play here with this. I mean, it's so hard to believe what they've really created here.
So in order to cover up for that, they have to create another thing. Hey, just keep piling on new Nuremberg defendants. We're coming after you.
That's what I'm saying. So some of the takeaways from the Lindell event. Who'd you run across? I know you probably had a chance to see Captain Kessler there. Did you know Captain Kessler before all this fun, or?
No, I never crossed
Okay.
paths. The first time I crossed paths with him was when they did a hit piece on us together, as though like we're like co-conspirators. What is it called? Election denier. Yeah, I'm an election. You guys are election fraud deniers, right? So anyhow, I mean, literally the first time I physically met the guy, and maybe even the first time, I'd have to look and think back. I think maybe the first time I had a substantive conversation with him was when Reuters did a hit piece on us back in, I think, October of 2021 or maybe later. And
Yeah,
so since they
gotcha.
did the hit piece, they listed the military veterans, disinformation, this and that. So I'm like, let me read this article. Oh, these are people I need to sync up with. Some of them I never
Right.
heard of. So like, all right, let's synchronize our efforts. You must be doing something right if you're getting attack pieces on you. So that was the impetus for me to kind of get more involved.
Nice.
Because that to me, it's like I'm over the target.
Matters.
I need to raise my efforts.
You get a Media Matters medal, and you know you're doing something right. I'm with you. I got a couple of them myself.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, raw sewage starts hitting you. New York Slimes, Washington Compost. I'm like, all right. Looks like I'm over to the target. Let's roll.
Over the target. What are some of the things that your takeaways from the event, and how effective do you think the WMD will be?
Yeah, so from the event, I would say the biggest takeaway. I've been to all three of them. Okay, so biggest takeaways. So strategically speaking, the first one had maybe 150, 200 people. The second one had maybe 450, maybe about 2.5, 3 times the amount. This one I think had probably 1,000 at least. And I know people are going to say, "Oh, the seats were empty." If you go to the hallway and look at literally half the people are out there networking, conversing, and coordinating, and then about half of the people are inside watching and observing, and then another, well, that's basically almost all of the folks. But then you also have the podcasters that are literally interacting with a lot of people that are speaking up there with the 50 people, 50 states represented, etc. But I would say that it's only escalating in the amount of reach and the amount of people in attendance. And then the second component I'll say is just to kind of piggyback off of that. A lot of what happens at that summit, not only do you see it happening, live on RSBN or Lindell TV, but it's the interactions and conversations and the synchronization that's occurring, the exchange of contact, and literally you're building a base of support, because a lot of times you'll see people from the same state that had not known each other. And then we also had meetings on the sidelines after all of it was done in order to coordinate the national effort in addition to that. So coupled with the podcasting going on to literally gain more attention. Because think about it. An event like that, you have 10, 20 different podcasters that each have, even if they're 10 to 50,000 viewers in the collective, we're looking at millions, right? We didn't have that before. And those viewers we're peeling them off of faux news, right? We're peeling them off of Newsvax, all these other milk toast, what I call toxic, feckless, stone cold coward news organizations that bend a knee to China first, and that, sing and dance to the tune of folks like your beloved Mikey Pence and his handlers, George Bush, the Cheneys of the world.
Yeah, well, you should be being wrong about.
I had to throw that in there, man, because I know this is gonna. I was expecting this to get contentious because people are like, "Oh, don't do an interview. He's a bomb thrower." I'm like, "A bomb thrower? Where? Send me. I like bomb throwers."
No, we're gonna get to. I want to get to.
I think just by you having that portrait in your background, I don't think there's really a deviation. Like you can make me as mad as possible, and it won't still bother me, because I think our core principles are already aligned just by looking at your background.
Two veterans, we understand each other. You know what I'm saying? I get you, man, and I just appreciate you very much. But I do want to get to some stuff, though.
Electrical contact. Let's go.
Yeah, let's go through get to some stuff. We have done a lot of coverage and a lot of discussion about Pence, about January 6th, the lead up to January 6th. In fact, you and I had we held the place open for like an hour and a half because we did a live interview in Wisconsin. They were like trying to kick us out because we were having such an awesome discussion.
And we didn't get to all of it.
No, we didn't. But we've pretty much, for those that are listening, they've pretty much laid it all out. They understand how the dynamics of it all. I want to specifically focus on debating the role of the vice president on January 6th, because I think it's very important that we nail that down and understand what we think the powers can be, should be, or what effects he should have taken. So explain to me what the goal was in theory of Mike Pence's and the electors, and what you think was the right thing to do with regards to Mike Pence and the electors on January 6th.
Let me start with this. So my arguments and everything that I was working on and tweeting about is totally, those theories and discussions and thoughts, totally separate from what ended up getting way more play, meaning John Eastman, the other attorneys, all these people that have been falsely criminalized. Those theories and efforts were I had absolutely nothing to do with those. I want to make sure that literally there was a firewall in the sense that I didn't communicate with any of them about anything related to alternate electors. That was totally, I saw it, I observed it, I knew that was going on, but I was like, you know what? I have an even more effective and more, I guess, impactful manner in which to correct this illegal election. And so that starts with, there's really, I'm not going to rehash everything that is going on with them. That's going to be litigated in the courts, right? Because at the end of the day, they embarrassed, the way I see it, they embarrassed Mike Pence, and now Mike Pence has to defend himself by criminalizing anybody that could then go back into office with Trump, because they're going to go after, I mean, let's face it, they're going to go after Pence and everybody in those networks that is doing this to them. So we're playing for keeps, right? It's not just litigation. This is going to be a game of chicken, and it's going to escalate probably to the max. And I'm okay with that. Most people aren't, but let's play ball. Now, having said that, in order to understand my argument for January 6th, you have to understand the Electoral Count Act process going all the way back to at least December 23rd. This is what no one was talking about except for me. If you look at the Electoral Count Act, I believe I'd have to refresh my memory. I think it's Title 3, Section 12, under the old one before it was amended. And if you have the ability to pull it up, I'm just going off of memory right now because this was a couple years back.
I'll lead us in with the text of it, and I'll show the audience here on the screen if I can figure out which screen that I want to change to.
If you can search Title 3 and just type in Wednesday, the word Wednesday.
Oh, well, here's the Cornell law. County electoral votes in Congress, 3 U.S. Code 15. You want me to here? I'll share this. It's a pain for me to share.
If you pull up Wednesday, you just type in the word, and this will have to be the previous one because they amended it with the omnibus package.
You're talking about
in December 22.
Let me just read. Let me read what the Electoral Count Act says, and let's go from there. Congress shall be in session the 6th day of January, succeeding every meeting, so forth, so on. Powers of the President of the Senate. Number 1, ministerial in nature, except for otherwise provided in this chapter. The role of the President of the Senate, i.e. Vice President, while presiding over the joint session, shall be limited to performing solely ministerial duties. Number 2, powers explicitly denied. The President of the Senate shall have no power to solely determine, accept, or reject, or otherwise educate or resolve disputes over the proper certificate.
Yeah, that's the new. You're looking at the new amended one.
No. That's the original Electoral Count Act. What they did in the most recent law that they passed was this. They already, the text of ministerial was already in there. They just made clear that that text existed. And then they also raised the threshold from 1 House member and 1 senator for triggering a challenge to a vote for objection. So the way that it was publicly reported is not really what was in the text of the Change Electoral Count Act.
All right, let me look this up while we're talking so that we can get the exact text. So as I'm talking through this, one of the sections of Title 3, I think it's Section 12, talks about if by the 4th Wednesday of December, the states do not transmit their electors, it is incumbent upon the President of the Senate to send a demand memo to the secretaries of state demanding that they transmit their electors.
Yes.
A couple things that I think immediately when I read that text. Number one, that means that December 23rd is not the fail end all be all deadline for the states if this provision is in there, because it gives the president of the Senate then another opportunity to say, hey, send your electors, right? Number two, if he has the authority to do that, that means as the first executive or the first federal officer in the electoral college process to be able to have any say in the electoral college process is on December 23rd. Because up until that point, the states are conducting their elections, they certify them. On December 8th, they go ahead and conduct allocation of their electors. On December 14th, those electors vote in their state capitals. And then December 23rd, they are supposed to transmit it by that date. So my argument was, if those states transmit electors that violate the federal constitution, then that federal officer, the president of the Senate, must tell those states that what they transmitted was constitutionally insufficient, and they need to remedy that. He's not unilaterally telling them what he's accepting or rejecting. He's telling them the way that they were transmitted was unconstitutional, meaning it triggered the Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 violation, because those states, and Mike Pence has said this on numerous occasions in interviews, the states conducted their elections not in the manner in which the state legislatures prescribed. That means they violated Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. So then the memo and the later argumentation that I had subsequent to the tweet called the Operation Pence Card laid out that the vice president or the president of the Senate send it back to the states of those 6 states and say, hey, you can hold a new election according to your election law, and that will then not violate Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. And then based on the outcome of that, you will then transmit your electors, and everything's kosher. He's not telling them to vote for Trump Pence. He's telling them to hold a new election, and then whatever the result is, then we're good. Option 2, abstain. Don't transmit any of your electors. Again, nothing about alternate electors and nothing about dictating how you vote. And then option 3, if you want to save money, the taxpayer, and not hold a new election because you guys flubbed it from start, to finish because you ran your elections according to COVID, which violated all norms, principles, and laws of election law, then why don't you just have a joint session convene of your state legislature and hold a roll call vote according to whatever your state's quorum requirements are. That would take, a day or two for them to convene. And if they wanted to, they would vote Biden-Harris. They would vote for Biden-Harris electors, or they could vote for Trump-Pence electors. In that memo, and nowhere in my discussion did I say to Pence, you are to dictate how they're going to vote. No, they have to conduct one of those 3 things so that they fix the underlying illegalities. If they want to vote for Biden-Harris electors under that joint legislative session, done. The underlying illegalities are now remedied, fixed. Those, for example, Arizona's 11 electors are then transmitted, and now Arizona's electors are closed off, and now everything's constitutional. If every state did that, we're done. I would be the first one, sadly, to say, congratulations, Jiden. You are now a legitimately duly elected president, and your Kamala Harris over at the Naval Observatory is also a legitimate, duly elected vice president, even though I didn't vote for them. I do not support that. I don't like it. But at that point, they would be considered legitimate. Because Mike Pence did not do anything. Remember, this tweet came out, I think, December 20th or 21st. It was trending on Twitter for a couple of days. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Trump, whoever got caught wind of it, whether it's Scavino, because it was trending literally in the top for a couple of days. Yeah. They pick it up, and next thing I know, Trump retweets it with the memo. Has nothing to do with alternate electors. Has nothing to do with unilaterally dictating which electors will be accepted, or I guess you can say it's unilaterally having Mike Pence defend the Constitution because no one else up to that point was following it. So then he would have been reveled. I mean, it would have been his opportunity of fame.
It's
So
the
that's
first time I've
December
really heard it
23rd.
explained. Yeah, it's the first time I've heard it explained that way, and I like your thinking better than Eastman's, to be completely honest. I mean, at that point, it was way too late. But let's get into that. You know, I mean, at the point on December 23rd, I was and everybody was watching very closely, hoping that at least one state would not certify these garbage electors. And we heard of all the alternate electors. We discussed on this channel the history of alternate electors is basically every election. You know, I mean, it's funny how the Democrats frame the debate these days. They just completely ignore history and act like all this stuff is a surprise, right? Stuff's been going on for a long time. In fact, we talked about the JFK stuff. There's been not JFK, Nixon.
Well, 1960, the Hawaii electors, right?
Yeah,
was the previous one, and yeah. So I had nothing. I had no conversations with anybody in any way, shape, or form, verbally, text, email. My focus was after John Roberts essentially leveraged all of his influence and power on the Supreme Court in order to not accept the Texas versus Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin case. That's when I opened up, the Electoral Count Act, and I was like, all right, what's next in this process? Oh, it's Mike Pence's turn now in order to defend the Constitution. Because up until that point, and there's a lot of National File articles that literally followed a lot of my work on Twitter and reported on it. That's probably one of the singular best locations for it.
But I'm trying to read as much of it as possible, but I haven't heard it explained in the way of trying to get it done before December 23rd. But then it came to a point where I and everybody watched as, the rhinos in each one of these states decided to stick with what the vote was, which was all a bunch of garbage. And it was very frustrating to watch. And I was still trying to raise hope, raise awareness, just throw anything against the screen and let's see what we can do here. That's why I read Eastman's memo and thought that it may have been a good angle to go to. But at the point that the state legislatures and the governor had signed off and sent those electors to the federal government, the federal government's hands is tied at that point. And what I often see debated or discussed in this, and President Trump highlighting it incorrectly, in my opinion, too, is this idea that at that point, Pence had any role that could have affected certified electors signed off by governors that have been given to the federal government. I think it's a very dangerous discussion to go down, a very, very dangerous angle to go down, to say at that point that he can usurp the governor's powers and thus the state's powers to send those back to the states for reconsideration on any angle whatsoever.
I agree that under normal, I agree fully with you. Under normal circumstances, if a state conducts their election in the manner in which their state prescribed, meaning through their election law, the vice president has absolutely no role, except, and then on January 6th, they adjudicate, right? The Congress.
Yeah.
In 2020, all election laws were broken, not only in those 6 states, but you can tag on to that New Hampshire and several other states, right? That decided, you know what, due to COVID, we're just going to defecate on everything. Because why? We have to remove Trump. That's literally it. So then there has to be some sort of a check within the federal system. Because in order to elect a president and vice president, it's a negotiation between the state legislatures and the federal legislature, meaning the federal Congress. It's not adjudicated in the courts. It's not adjudicated by the Secretary of State. It's literally under the Constitution, it's a conversation and agreement between the state legislatures, at least the majority of them, right, through the 270 at this point for the majority of the allocation of electors, and the federal Congress to go ahead and say, you know what, yeah, we accept that. We agree with your picks for president, vice president. Now, to close this out, remember the December 23rd component is based on the Electoral Count Act, okay? In order to the role that Mike Pence has, his authority is from the Electoral Count Act in order to defend Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. He refused to defend that provision. So for me, and everybody follows along with how I see it, he clearly violated that provision of the Constitution along with everyone from the precinct, county, state level, okay? All of them were complicit. Now let's fast forward to January 6th. And
you're right. I mean, I agree with you at the fundamental level. They violated their oaths to defend the Constitution. They violated their state's constitution. And in general, they are a maladministration that has no actual power and at the fundamental level. So at the fundamental originalist level, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with John Eastman's stance and what his ideas and what his thinking around was this time too. As far as a constitutionalist, the people that hate the Constitution hate John Eastman, hate you, hate anybody else who dares stand up for the reality of the Constitution. But you fast forward to January 6th. First of all, proof of that Nancy Pelosi pulled off January 6th in order to disrupt the electoral.
My
Count
January
Act
6th option was totally separate from anybody else's argument. So that's why I think a lot of people, when they listen to mine, they confuse it with everyone else's. And that includes, I mean, who are some of the big names? Whether it's Eastman, whether it's, I mean, who are some other folks that come to mind?
The other names of the lawyers were in the name of the lawsuit. I didn't recognize a lot of them. Eastman was the most
Cheeseborough, I think. All these other people.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you hear what my component was, you're gonna be like, "Oh, wait, that's totally separate." And by the way, I don't think you can debunk my argument. So let's listen real quick. And
Okay.
I want everybody to debunk it.
Yeah, I'll lay out what is constitutional from my best understanding, my best research, and then you tell me how we could have used it on January 6th. Because I still had hope, man. I'll be honest with you, man. I was, but there's a lot of us that had a hope that on that day that our leaders would stand up and say, we can't allow this to happen.
So here's what I was doing. From at midnight on December 23rd, 11:59 and 59 seconds going into Christmas Eve on December 24th, right? When nothing happened with Pence, I basically said, at this point, it's going to get harder and harder to clean up the illegal 2020 election. And so what did I do? The next phase in this, it now is going to go to Congress on January 6th. Well, January 3rd is a key component too, because that's when the 117th Congress was sworn in. So what do? I go through my Rolodex. Who do I know that's a member of Congress? Let's start working the Rolodex. Hey, Congressman so-and-so, and you know what? I'm going to go ahead and lay those names out, okay? Hey, Congressman Ben Cline from Virginia. Hey, Congressman Bob Good from Virginia. Hey, Congressman Mike Waltz from Florida. Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, Congresswoman-elect. What's his name? Congressman Moore from Alabama. Let's see who else. Congressman, not on the phone, but I texted a lot, many others. Let's just say probably at least a dozen. And I said, you do not have to agree with me, Sidney Powell, Mike Lindell. Who else? Who else is out there? Throw some names out there.
Patrick Byrne.
Yeah. You don't have to agree with anybody. Digital manipulation, software, foreign interference. All you have to agree with me on in order to have the justification for yourself and your constituents on objecting to electors from those 6 states is the following. Did they run their elections not in the manner in which their state legislature prescribed?
Yeah.
And I said, that's it. And so what happens? Hey, that sounds good. I'll be objecting. Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen, another one. Okay, Ivan, leave me alone. I'm working it, right? Like, I'm hitting up all the people that I know. By the way, this is the first time I'm seeing some of these names, so they're going to go nuts. All these.
I mean, good, because there was only 6 that actually stood up when the time counted.
Well, hold on. That's the issue. We'll get to that. So I'm working the Rolodex, and literally some of them I'm talking to via phone, texting, as well as in person from January 3rd until January 6th. Well, January 5th. I'm in the Capitol talking to them, right? So explaining this whole process. I'm finding out later that, what's his name? Wheelchair, North Carolina. Congressman.
I just drew a blank.
You know what I'm talking about. He did that massive video, remember? I'm going to object. The first thing I'm going to do when I join Congress, he was a congressman-elect.
Yeah.
Madison Cawthorn. And he put out a video and he said, yep, that video was based on your analysis, Ivan, that we put in that video that ended up getting like 12, 20, 25 million views. So anyway, yeah. Not me. We got, at that point, I think there were 100, by January 5th, 147 members of the House, and growing by the minute, were in agreement that they had the constitutional authority in order to object based on this theory, which is they didn't run their elections according to the state law, and so it's on Congress to do so, to include Congressman Mike Waltz, whom I've known for a couple decades. We deployed to Afghanistan, the whole stuff, the whole shebang there. So there were also 12 U.S. senators that had publicly stated that they were going to object the following day, right? Remember this? And growing by the minute.
That's what we thought. We thought we could get out as many as 26 to 28 at that point.
So if you're
over 30.
Okay, little account by the name of @Raiklin on Twitter, just making some First Amendment noises in my personal capacity, private time, like, hey, this is kind of what I'm seeing, blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, 1 Trump retweet, 2 Trump retweets, 3 Trump retweets. Next thing you know, I got like 200 million impressions in December. I would think that 3 of those impressions on Twitter are probably Nancy Pelosi, wouldn't you guess?
Yes.
Her chief of staff, Terry McCullough, would you think?
Yes, definitely.
Her a senior advisor, Jamie Fleet, would you agree?
Yeah, probably her daughter too.
Her and others, right? Let's just say others. So now, in addition to that, before we go to January 6th, during that subsequent J6 cover-up committee hearing, I call it the Mike Pence cover-up committee hearing, headed up by his running mate, Liz Cheney. During the 3rd hearing, they mentioned my name. An individual by the name of Ivan Raiklin tweeted a memo or retweeted by Trump that called on the vice president to, reject electors from certain states that certified their electors. They think that argument was for January 6th. That only referred to December 23rd.
Gotcha.
They're clueless. And then that same reference in that 3rd hearing was later literally verbatim taken and put it into page 32, line 88 of the Trump indictment, which they think that somehow that relates to January 6th. Has nothing to do with Pence's role on January 6th.
Gotcha.
Here's what my argument was for Kevin McCarthy and Mike Pence on January 6th. And this is where, if enough people realized that this discussion was going on, things would have turned out very differently on January 6th.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussions, just not very many answers. The hands were freaking tied. Go ahead.
All right, so here's where we're at. If you look at the Electoral Count Act, it does not specify how objections are to be voted on. 1 person, 1 vote in the House, or 1 state, 1 vote in the House.
It says 1 state, I think, but
no. So the 12th Amendment talks about a joint session. It talks about the contingent election in Congress. The 12th Amendment does, and it talks about a quorum, and it also talked about when there is a contingent election, you vote 1 state, 1 vote. The Electoral Count Act is silent, meaning it doesn't dictate when you go into session and there's an objection, you got to vote 1 person, 1 vote, which leaves it up to interpretation.
Here's the 12th Amendment. I'll read this one section.
Yeah. Contingent election.
It has been sealed, the state of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House of Representatives, open all certificates, and the votes shall be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for president, so forth, so on. And then it goes into towards the bottom, it goes into the objection process. But you're right, though. The 12th Amendment is not specific on the numbers. It says a majority. And it says in some cases it says if there isn't a full quorum, it can still be a majority of full quorum. That discussion is where I kind of want to talk about.
Wait, not yet. We'll get to that real quick.
Yeah,
I want to delineate this. The Eastman and everybody else's argument that was publicized and is now being litigated in the courts, that focuses on the 12th Amendment, what the vice president's role is. My argument was what the Electoral Count Act is silent on, that if the Speaker of the, if the majority state delegation chair, I called it, and you can go back to all my tweets and all this other stuff. Bottom line is you have two ways in which to vote. You have the one person, 1 vote. At that time, it would have been 222 Democrats and 211 Republicans with 2 seats that were still being adjudicated, right? early in that time frame. So if it was Nancy, so they go out and break out in a session. Arizona, right, is objected to. As we saw Paul Gosar and Ted Cruz stand up, object, and then the Senate goes into their chambers. Let's just say no Fedsurrection occurred, and that transpires at the end of the 2 hours. What happens? There's a vote in the House on the objection. There's a vote in the Senate on the objection. In the House, it would have, by the way, what I'm laying out to you, I sent this to Kevin McCarthy directly. I texted this to him. I also sent this directly to Mark Short, Mike Pence's chief of staff. Okay. And this was the argument. On January 6th, after the debate, 2 hours, there's going to be a vote. Nancy Pelosi is going to vote one person, one vote. Kevin McCarthy, as the chair of the majority state delegation, which consists of 27 Republican states, 20 Democrat states, and 3 states that are tied, is going to hold a vote at the end of those debates. And he's going to vote in that manner. And even if the Democrats say, oh, we're not going to participate in that, that's not right. We're going to vote one person, one vote. Even under those circumstances, 43 states have at least one Republican, meaning there's now enough to conduct a quorum under that one state, one vote ruling, because you need 2/3 of the states represented, meaning 34. So it becomes 43-0 or 27-20-3 if the Democrats participate. And everybody, assuming everybody votes by party. So then when the joint session reconvenes and Mike Pence, as the presiding officer, gavels back in and says, what is the ruling on the objection for Arizona? Pelosi or her designee stands up and says, it does not stand, 222-211. Kevin McCarthy says, point of order, Mr. Presiding Officer. Actually, we vote to object under the 12th Amendment guidance of a contingent election, since it is absent on how we vote in the Electoral Count Act. What say you, Presiding Officer? And then under that circumstance, then I argued, Mike Pence then looks over to Nancy Pelosi's parliamentarian and asks, what do I do in this dilemma? And the parliamentarian says, whatever. And Mike Pence says, noted. You are binding on a House of Representatives and only on the House. We are currently in joint session. You are not binding under this 12th Amendment proceeding. And then he looks over the Senate parliamentarian who's next to him and asks, what would you recommend I do? And he responds with, thank you for that input. You are binding when I'm the president of the Senate in the Senate chambers. Now, since there really is no parliamentarian in this circumstance, I, as the presiding officer, Mikey Pence, have to decide, who do I go with? The one person, one vote rule by Nancy Pelosi, or the one state, one vote rule by the majority state delegation chair, Kevin McCarthy? Flip coin, and it's really up to Pence. Because remember, as a ministerial officer, you're laid with this dilemma. What are you supposed to do as in your ministerial duties? You have to make the call. That was my argument. And it would have been up to Mike Pence with Kevin McCarthy teeing this up for him to go ahead and rule. And if he ruled that I'm going to go with the one state, one vote rule under the guidance of the 12th Amendment, then you would have had objections to Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, others, and that Pennsylvania. And that would have forced a contingent election overall because no one would have had 270. And then you would have had a 27-20-3 House voting for a president. And then the Senate, which was at this point 52-48 Republican, because Loeffler and Perdue were still in, it would have been a re-election for Pence. That was the argument. Now debunk it. You're muted.
I see your argument. The thing is there is a procedure, the way that, like you said, there's a way that they can object. And what actually happened is Nancy Pelosi made sure the Fedsurrection happened. It all got interrupted. They waited until 2 a.m. until the objectors actually hit, and only 6 senators for Arizona and 5 for Pennsylvania voted for the actual objection. My argument is, at the point that electors, state certified electors, get sent to the federal government, their role is only to use the objection process, and then if the objection then has the 2/3 votes that it needs, then it gets sent back to the states, and the legislatures and thus the governor then can deal with it. But any kind of deviation from that process of the actual objection process, to me, is an overreach of the federal government, and it is a usurpation of the states' rights. And I'm very protective of that, because what would happen if in 2024 Trump wins and Mike Pence had taken the stance of taking any kind of angle whatsoever to involve himself in the election? What would Kamala Harris do? She would just do the exact opposite. She would do the exact same thing. She would just say, I don't accept these electors. We're going to find people that I think are going to have an alternative slate of electors, and then they're going to use that same angle against us. And it gives way too much power to the federal government to get involved at that angle.
I understand. I mean, I hear you. I understand that argument. But here's what we have to also counter that with. When non-legislative actors within the states run roughshod over our constitutional order, which they did clearly in 2020 with this election.
Yeah, definitely.
There has to be a check, right? Remember, it's an agreement between the states and the federal government. Now, one argument people make is that it doesn't really matter what the states transmit. It's up to the Congress on determining who becomes the president and vice president, right? That's one argument. I don't like that.
Yeah, me either.
One thing that the states have at their disposal to then also usurp any overreach that you suspect that might happen, like you argue, and I agree, they could take that to the next level, is the 10th Amendment, where you can have a state, or not state, but enough states in the collective, and this has not been tested, but if you read the wording of the 10th Amendment, along with the Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, there's no date limitation on when a state legislature can allocate, reallocate, decertify, or do what it wants to with its electors. And that's why I've been traveling the country to essentially explain that. You see that your electors, Arizona, Wisconsin, whatever, were transmitted. Look at what the evidence now shows. In Wisconsin, you have Gableman report. You have the Supreme Court case that literally drop boxes are illegal, meaning the 2020 election was totally illegally run, illegitimate. Like, when is the political courage going to rise up in order for Wisconsin to pull back its 10 electors? When is Arizona going to say, you know what?
Robin Voss says, I like the way things the way they are. That's what Robin Voss said. So there's a couple of things.
So does that make sense that my argumentation that I just laid out has absolutely nothing to do with what the litigation's about? And I just think that my theory, while it's never been tested, it's still within the frame of the Constitution and the Electoral Count Act. And they didn't even amend the Electoral Count Act to address that.
Yeah, so is Eastman's. I mean, it's constitutional. My argument is, well, before I get to more why I'm glad they didn't do it, and why I think this is a bad attack towards Pence, even though there's plenty of others. And starts here.
Oh, before you continue. So what my recommendation, it doesn't rest any unilateral authority on Pence. It's for Pence to make the determination on which style of vote by the House is going to be accepted. Meaning, it's the House in its collective that's voting to determine how to allocate, not Pence unilaterally deciding what's going to be accepted and not.
And here's what he ended up doing. And here's what he ended up doing with Nancy Pelosi. And here's the real criticism of what I think we should go with this.
No quorum.
He did change the law. He did change the rules
unilaterally.
Of the Senate, unilaterally with Nancy Pelosi, agreed on it with the Senate at arms, and the not the Senate at arms, but the rules
with the advice of the attending physician and the sergeants at arms, is what Pelosi said.
So they did change the rules, and what they did do was they made it much easier made it much harder to object by limiting the amount of quorum, and that is again against the Constitution, and that for me is legitimate criticism of Mike Pence.
Right, that joint session was a complete nullity. Now, if Mike Pence allowed everyone, you got to keep in mind contextually, 3 days earlier on January 3rd, Nancy Pelosi wanted everybody on the House floor so that she could become the Speaker of the House. Everybody. Yet 72 hours later, or I should say 73 hours later to be precise, COVID went just so nutso that 3 days later and 1 hour later, at the advice of the attending physician and the sergeants at arms, due to COVID, only 11 Democrats, 11 Republicans in the House, and 11 Democrats, 11 Republicans in the Senate were allowed to be present on the House floor to participate in the joint session with the agreement of leadership, meaning McConnell, Schumer, McCarthy, Pelosi. And then that's when Pence gavels in and says, that's cool. Congressman Morgan Griffith tried to object and say, hey, how are we supposed to, you saw that video, right?
Yeah.
I put that out multiple times, and he tried to push quorum.
Tried to raise awareness on it, yeah.
And no quorum was had. So that's your second violation by Pence, 12th Amendment violation of the quorum. And then it was later in that day that Mike Pence violated, I argue, the 25th Amendment when he personally took it upon himself to order General Milley around with the National Guard. The only way he can do that lawfully is to invoke the 25th Amendment. He didn't do that.
What they ended up doing was invoking the 25th Amendment against President Trump. They just said, that's it, we're done with him, he's gone. And what's interesting is seeing this from my angle, I see moves and counter moves happening. I see the lawyers, the Eastmans, the constitutional minds looking for constitutional solutions for a unconstitutional rigged election. It just seems like common sense to me if there's anybody who's actually interested in constitutional rule of law. But obviously DC, they don't give a shit about that. They only care about their own power and their own power structure. The thing that I've seen recently is that several of the states, I'm not sure was it Heather that put this out, that several of the states actually requested Pence to send back the electors. I'd be interested to see the names of those, because if I have the states in mind, Michigan,
Pennsylvania was the one on January 5th. Pennsylvania sent it.
Pennsylvania's governor, they definitely didn't request to send it back. Wisconsin has ever.
No, it was the legislature. It was not a majority of the legislature. It was a good portion of the legislature that they didn't get enough signatures, and they directed it to I think Pelosi and McConnell. And I said that you actually need to send that to Pence, not the House Speaker and Majority Leader. But again, I was like, I only have so much time to educate so many people, right? It's like, I'm trying.
No, I mean, I get it. But
and when no one wants to listen.
Well, once they're certified electors, you get into a muddy area of law, of constitutional law. So it's not as if it's just cut and dry, especially with the courts in D.C. They don't operate under constitutional law at this time. They didn't operate under constitutional law in D.C. So while you're making a great constitutional argument, and just as Eastman did, the reality of how the law applies itself in D.C. is not. They're not going to back it up. You're going to end up in major trouble for violating all these garbage laws they have in place. And I think that's why they took the correct step of not taking it any further. I think the right thing to do was what they had to do and make the hard decision that they made. And that is, at this point,
and that is violate the Electoral Count Act, the 12th Amendment and 25th Amendment.
At this point, they already had.
And then since you're the uniparty's favorite,
at this point, they already had certified electors. At this point, they already had certified electors at the state level. You already had governors sign off on this stuff. If you usurp that power of the states at any point at this point, then you're doing the disservice to the future of America. And I think that would have been a terrible line to cross by enabling the government to come in and change laws and change the way things happen just because they didn't like the electors that were sent their way.
I agree if there's no predicate behind it, but the underlying precedent is not for whimsically deciding when to accept and not to accept. The underlying premise here is that the states violated the federal constitution in the conduct of transmitting their electors. And so they need to be scolded at a minimum. But I mean, I shouldn't say scolded, but there needs to be a check on their lawlessness. Yeah. Because remember, it was the governors that said, hey, guess what? Mike Pence is going to issue us billions of dollars because of his seat on the coronavirus task force, and we need to comply with in order to get all these contracts as it relates to face toilets, remdesivir, the ventilators, and then subsequently the PCR tests, and then the DNA mutilation injections. Well, guess who was involved with all that? Who was creating the policy behind it and doling out all the contracts as it relates to the CCP-19 money, right? Well, it was Pence that headed up that task force. And guess which governors he was coordinating with? The Sununus of the world in New Hampshire, the Brian Kemps in Georgia, the Doug Duceys in Arizona. Those names ring a bell?
Yeah, I pick up what you're putting down. I'm looking at it from a realistic level.
I think it was intentional. They made all those decisions
so
in order to make as much money hand over fist and then reward everybody that participated in the illegal, unlawful election that resulted in the removal of, I mean, let's face it. Imagine Trump in a second term and you have General Flynn back in office. Imagine you have me sitting as the chair of the Intel Oversight Board as part of the president's Intel Advisory Board. John Durham has absolutely zero authority compared to this position, meaning direct report to the president to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse within the intelligence community and the national security apparatus, meaning the first target is going to be the National Security Division over at the DOJ. The second target of this investigation is going to be the National Security Branch over at the FBI. And then we go down through the DHS and every other lawless actor that participated in the illegal spying on the Trump campaign, the defrauding of the FISA court. That's why I have a Substack, because literally I was going to be doing that, but in a different position, meaning I was going to ruin every single one of them that participated in the lawless activity. And should we secure a second term for Trump, I'll be an intern in that position, taking no salary as I continue to expose Joe Pientka, Elvis Chan, Brian Auten, Christopher Ray Epps, Jim Baker, and then some, and then some. If you're listening in, I am going to absolutely ruin you because you earned it. That's why.
They did earn it, and they did rig the election, and it was all purposeful, and it is the bigger picture of it all, how they pulled it off. I think part of what gets missed in this discussion with President Trump raising awareness on Pence and stuff, it doesn't get to the level of this level of corruption. You know what I'm saying? And then I have last two arguments for you about why I'm glad Pence didn't take this action. However, realizing that he had the authority, realizing that we could have gone down this road, but man, it's a dangerous road to go down.
No. So here's what you're missing, I think. It's not dangerous because Pence then sends it back on December 23rd, allowing the states to correct their underlying illegality. It's still on the states to decide how they allocate their electors.
Yeah, the 23rd.
So that's what I'm saying is that my argument is because so many people were talking about Pence's role on January 6th, total unilateral rejection. I never subscribed to that. Like, I agree with you. I don't want a vice president to have unilateral authority, nor did I ever argue that should be the case. Others may have done that. I don't know. I totally agree with you that a vice president should never have a unilateral authority to reject electors.
Yeah, and I like your argument, though. And the water gets muddied on purpose when they conflate it with January 6th versus the December 23rd. That completely changes the argument. So I'm glad that we got down to that. But I have two things left of why I think it's dangerous at the federal level to interfere with state-certified electors, even if they are unconstitutional. Although I hope we get to a point in the future where we actually have a constitutional rule of law in this country again. That'd be nice. The last one is watching as the awakening has hit so many over the past 2.5 years. I really do believe that there's a part of this that it had to be this way, and I believe that if Pence and or the establishment that wanted Trump gone had taken a different route and said, okay, look, people have spoken, we need to stay constitutional and remember our oaths. It seems like a pipe dream right now. I'm speaking about a DC that doesn't exist, but let's just say that they had decided to act within an oath. I think we would have had a civil war in this country. I think we would have had uprisings and disaster everywhere we would have looked. And so the only thing I want to bring into this debate
is we did have a civil war in the summer of 2020.
Yeah,
we already had one.
It would have been worse. It would have been a huge uprising, in every major city around. This is what they were planning for. In fact, they may try to pull this off in 2024, 25, once this does happen, because they really want to go that route to force violence. And I think if they had taken the stand on January 6th, December 25th, whatever, if they would have implemented and said, Trump, look, even though Fox News reported Arizona, look, they were wrong, I think the American public would have rejected it back then, and I don't think we would be where we are right now with waking up as many people with regards to how rigged our elections really are. I think we would have missed that opportunity.
Let me respond to that. So, how much damage was done in the summer of love in 2020? The violence that was committed in the cities. Then subsequent to that, you had this belligerent, illegitimate executive branch. At this point, according to their own numbers, has murdered over 38,000 Americans due to the jab. And that's probably more in the three, depending on, remember the 1% thing with the Harvard study, you can extrapolate it by 100.
350 to 500,000
Right.
Is what I can prove as deaths.
So you have that aspect, and then how many people were mutilated and injured due to the jab, right? And all the emergency use authorized products. So if you compare those numbers and you compare it to the executive branch, meaning Mike Pence's little employee Fauci that went ahead and funded the Wuhan lab, if you take those numbers and believe them as being incidental of causing mayhem and murder throughout the world as well as the United States, they've committed more mass murder, this executive branch, than literally during, I think, all wars. Well, let me see here. If you start to add the Civil War, Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korea, and add all of that up, I think it's about the same, the damage that they've caused. So when you say there's going to be a worse Civil War, I think we would have been in a much safer position, because the mandates that caused all of the lawlessness and death and destruction wouldn't have occurred, and we would have probably only had to essentially quell a few cities in a very aggressive manner that would have resulted maybe in hardly a few dozen deaths.
Yeah, I'm with you. I wish that we had true patriots in DC that would have taken the chance and gone there, because I don't know how much more time we have left in this country. There's a lot of people that are losing hope. There's a lot of people that have just completely have been disenfranchised and are just done. They're just, you have people who watched JFK get murdered from them, and now you're watching them, rig and create a coup within the United States of America after they spread it from Syria to Ukraine to all around the world. They basically pulled off the same color revolution tactics that they did in the square in Ukraine that they tried to pull off here on January 6th. So
They did.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi, her daughter Alexander, her son-in-law Michael Voss, Yogananda Pittman, the cover-up crew, which is Thomas Manger, the current Capitol Police Chief. No one's ever mentioning the name Thomas Tad Tobias. Do you know who that is?
No.
He's the general counsel at U.S. Capitol Police. So this is how it works. If you're a J6 defendant, no one knows this. In order to be criminally prosecuted as a J6 defendant, you have to have a criminal charge sheet from a U.S. Capitol Police officer that's then reviewed by the general counsel. The facts are put together. The CCTV footage is pulled in and manipulated. Anybody that was in your vicinity that was a U.S. Capitol Police officer, they look at their personnel file and say, hey, Capitol Police Officer B, guess what? You want that demerit out of your HR file? You need to write an impact sworn statement that the person that we're going to prosecute, because the social media shows that he's a very vocal Trump supporter, you need to say that you're of a different pigment. You need to say that there was some whatever. He used some words that were offensive to you, and now sign off on it. That statement coupled with the CCTV footage, let's slap that together, the CCTV footage that was manipulated. Now let me provide it to Yogananda Pittman. Since January 8th to July 23rd, was elevated to be the Capitol Police acting police chief, because she was the one at the behest of Pelosi to conduct the Fedsurrection coup, as she was a head of Intel and Interagency Coordination Division. Anyway, the Capitol Police General Counsel gives it to her. She signs off on it. And then that General Counsel says, hey, homies, remember we used to work together before I was at U.S. Capitol GC? I got you a full stop, bulletproof, 100% conviction rate on 1,000 individuals, because I manipulated, along with Yogananda Pittman, all the evidence that we have that you can't get access to, executive branch because that's ours. And by the way, public, you can't access it because you can't FOIA us. And oh, by the way, J6 defendant, you want to try that Brady stuff? Well, good luck, because separation of powers, Brady only applies to the executive branch. And if you want to try to get the Brady material of all CCTV footage, you're going to have to go pound sand because you're not going to get any of it. Try to litigate it. And meanwhile, Kevin McCarthy doesn't have the leverage to force the Capitol Police Chief to go ahead and release the CCTV footage. Why? Because the Capitol Police Chief and the General Counsel are the two that are going to be ones that authorize the release of the CCTV footage. Who appointed the Capitol Police Chief? Thomas Manger? He was appointed on July 24th of 2021. And who was he appointed by? The Capitol Police Board. And who does the Capitol Police Board appoint? Well, the Sergeant at Arms of House and Senate were appointed by Pelosi and Schumer. So subsequently, they're going to downstream from that appoint someone that's loyal to Pelosi and Schumer. You think that Capitol Police Chief is going to release the CCTV footage that's going to then be used to prove that he manipulated and doctored the video? This is the moment where you say expletive no.
Exactly right. No, I'm with you. And we all keep putting the pressure on McCarthy to actually release it, but that's the truth.
The pressure needs to go on Tad DeBias and Thomas Manger. And luckily, we got Lieutenant T.K. Johnson, who's out there. You heard him, right? Tarek Johnson. He's out there sounding the alarms every day. Like, he's trying to do as much as he can. He's got to feed the family because he just got hosed because he's taking the moral and ethical high ground by essentially he departed the Capitol Police so that he can blow the whistle. And then luckily, we now have the former Capitol Police Chief, Stephen's son, thankfully to Tucker, gave him another opportunity to lay it out. He basically, without saying it in direct terms, what happened on January 6th was a Fedsurrection that was spearheaded by Nancy Pelosi and executed by Yogananda Pittman. If you read between the lines, that's literally the 1 hour of his interview. But he's very, he's very cautious.
He's very cautious, but that's exactly what he said. It was not an accident, and it's not an accident that they're hiding the evidence, not just from the January 6th defendants who are being tortured in prison every day, but from the American public. I'm with you. Last 15 minutes or so, and I'll let you go. I know you've had a long week traveling and stuff. And
no, thanks.
You had a chance to relax.
No, thanks for bearing with me. I know we want to do this earlier, but dude, I was jammed up.
No, I get it, man. I'm just glad you came on so we could have this discussion and, nail it down a little bit more on the different perspectives of this because, I get slammed for defending Pence. I'm not defending Pence. I'm saying that.
No, I agree with your argument that for him to use, not Pence, for a vice president / presiding officer on January 6th, for that individual to have unilateral authority on determining who to accept and reject in terms of electoral college votes, that sets horrible precedent, the worst. On that, we totally agree. But I think you just didn't know my exact argumentation with the whole bifurcation of the majority state delegation chair. I argue that has the discretion. There's still this, whatever you want to call it, loophole, or there's not clarity on how an objection is to be voted on. And they didn't amend it to fix that. So in next year or whatever, January of 2025, we still could be in a position where if the House one person, one vote is one party, and the delegation vote is one state, one vote, there could be friction there that could be tested in January 2025.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So let's get into where we see us going here. My argument on this has been, let's just let the people come from believing that we actually have legitimate elections in this country, which is the majority of where we were in 2020, to now 60 to 70% of the voting bloc sees the election rigged for what it is. But it needs to be more than just the people being knowledgeable that JFK was freaking murdered by the CIA or insiders, right? It needs to be more than just the knowledge that we know that it was rigged. There's got to be accountability, and we have not seen it. I had hope for Kerry Lake's case and Abe's case in Arizona. I have hope that Fani Willis has just walked into a giant trap in Georgia. I had hope that maybe in Wisconsin we would have somebody with a backbone up there that would not just rule that the election was illegitimate and unconstitutional, but would remedy that. I don't see that. But so where do you see, do you have any hope as far as remedying 2020? And if we're past that, which it does seem like, where do you see for hope for the future? Give me some positives on where we can go as far as the future goes.
All right, just quickly on remedy 2020. I mean, I'm talking to state reps, right, in appropriate states, and state senators in appropriate states. And I think if we re-engage my hearing from Arizona from February 23rd, and I need help with basically cropping that out, because the case that I laid out is so much more compelling, because you got Jim Comer that laid out the whole Biden criminal syndicate. You've got weaponization that laid out the whole censorship industrial complex, to include the 60 scumbags that manipulated and said that the Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. You have all these various components that are now beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Because they've pulled it, called it. It's one thing for me to say it, for Garrett Ziegler to say it as a nonprofit. It is now an official record that the 2020 election was rigged in many ways, right? Let's just take that. And the states need to go ahead and look at themselves and say, you know what? We're going to reclaim our sovereignty. And the way that you reclaim your sovereignty is to no longer continue to allocate your units of sovereignty, known as presidential and vice presidential electors. Because let's face it, what is it that the state has? It's units of sovereignty that that represents the state in giving legitimacy to the senior most individuals in the executive federal branch. So when that legitimacy is no longer there, as evidenced and proven, they need to test this and pull all those back. I get it. There's two people say that, oh, the only way to take out a president is to impeach through the House and conviction in the Senate. That's for the federal legislature to do. The second component is internally the executive branch can do so with the 25th Amendment removal. But the third option, I argue, that has never been done, never been tested at this point, it is way past time to do it. And that is for the state legislatures in the collective to bring that legitimacy below 270, thus triggering the 12th Amendment in the House to then have that contingent election. Another option is to, let's face it, there was no quorum on January 6th. Kevin McCarthy needs to call a joint session to conduct a proper joint session with a quorum, go through the objections, and then lay out all the evidence of the 6 contested states. And at this point, even more. We can throw in New Hampshire and Nebraska's, 2nd congressional district into that mix, and maybe others like New Mexico.
Nevada too, yeah.
And yeah, the 6, 7, 8, 9 states needs to be presented before the Congress, and then we determine whether or not this Congress will accept or reject. And I get it, you don't like the federal Congress to object, but at the end of the day, there has yet to be an opportunity to adjudicate those electors from 2020. We haven't had that opportunity, and that might be the only method for it. Now, for moving forward, remember we started where I said, here are the voters and here's the actual outcome, but you have the crony capitalism in the middle?
Yeah.
The way forward, and this is what I articulated all week last week at the Election Crime Bureau Summit, and I did a fantastic interview with Sharona Bishop. It was basically 2.0. Did you see the one from last year?
No, I missed it.
It was going around, and it really made the waves when I reposted it last week. But bottom line is, the path forward in order to basically have our elections commensurate with the will of the people is we have to bankrupt the 4 institutions that run our elections and convince the public that they're legit. Faux news needs to be bankrupted. The RNC needs to be bankrupted. Deviant voting systems and LHS, which is essentially using deviant voting system software in all of New England. And they're headquartered in Salem, New Hampshire. And the person that has the most influence over that company, obviously other than the CEO, politically speaking, is the governor of New Hampshire, because his father, John Sununu, who was the governor previously in New Hampshire, allowed the first contract for LHS to temporarily run the elections starting in 1973, and they've been in place for 50 years. And we've heard Sununu say he's going to do everything in his power to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't secure the nomination. So then if he's saying that, and he can easily manipulate and then have faux news say that, oh, look, Mike Pence actually secured the nomination. even though he's polling at 0. He's right. He's got 0 charisma. I think that that's their plan, and our best path forward to block that is I'll send you the path and plan. But bottom line, we need to have private citizen Mike Lindell host the first one. I see right now, as of yesterday, what's his name? Tucker is going to be doing an interview with Trump. You need to create content that is parallel to what the RNC debates are, so that they're more compelling than anyone wanting to see the RNC debate. When you can do that over the next 5 debates, you ruin the RNC, you bankrupt any viewership of faux news, thus neutering their influence. And then in the conversation of, as you have, imagine if Mike Lindell or Alex Jones, right, hosts a conversation. Let's face it, Mike Lindell, Alex Jones, Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, and then ultimately Elon Musk hosts a fireside chat between RFK Jr. and Trump. Do you think anyone's going to watch the RNC debates? If that's right? No.
Yeah.
So that was my proposal, and I've sent it out to over half of the names that I just mentioned. And luckily, we got Tucker to agree to interview Trump, so that's going to help in that process.
Definitely. I'm with you. Defunding the RNC should be a major goal, and it's something that we've been talking about here, voting with your wallet and changing the way that you you share political donations and cutting out the RNC. I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah, RNC and the DNC, because then let's face it, then we give an opportunity to somebody that's a critical thinker. I mean, you would agree with me that the only candidate that's running for president that has any name ID, the only one that got it right on COVID is RFK. Okay.
Yeah. No, you're right.
I disagree with him on almost all the other issues, but I need him in the fight so that he can implement Nuremberg 2.0 for all these scumbags.
Yeah, I hope he does get a role in Trump's administration under CDC. Like, CDC director would be great.
So I volunteer to be the newly minted Secretary of Retribution, and I will have RFK Jr. be like, you have the Nuremberg 2.0 portfolio.
Love it. It needs to happen. I mean,
and I'll take care of the DOJ and the FBI and the DHS and the whole national security state. I got that. And then I'll hire immediately all J6ers, all of them.
Here. Many lives have been destroyed, and many fans have been destroyed, and they don't seem to care. The way that they are going after their power structure and just flaunting it in front of everybody is pretty brazen. And
can you imagine if you had the Secretary of Retribution with 1,000 J6ers as employees?
Right? It's hard to me to think that they can get away with this. You know what I'm saying? It's hard for me to see how in the future they can continue to flaunt this in front of everybody. You're watching a power structure that has proven that the good old boys club exists. You know, they select who they want to run for governor, who they want to run for their state offices, and so it's a power structure from the baby boomer era and before who has been there for a long time, and they do not want to give up any power. But you're watching grassroots activists really take action. Do you have hope that the grassroots action and this transfer of power from the career politicians that have been there for 30, 50 years to now a new age group of patriots can have success going into the future?
I do. It's slower than what we wanted. And the reason why I say I do is because look at your own numbers from last year to this year, how many viewers you have. Look at all those in the Patriot movement. Look at Lindell's numbers. Look at, Bannon. Look at RSBN. Look at Epoch TV, right? Epoch Times. Look at all the truth, freedom, information, like content creators. The numbers are just spiking. They got to come from somewhere. And man, when I go speak before RNC committees, which I'm getting more and more invites to at the county level, I start with the following question. By a show of hands, who knows someone, a friend, relative, or heard someone that was injured or died from the jab? Over half the room raises their hand. And the next thing is, do you know why they accepted the jab? Because I don't want to blame it on the people in the room because they're going to get offended, right? Because let's face it, a lot of them succumbed like lemmings. So then I say, do you know why they accepted the jab? I'll explain. The following individuals over at the FBI and DOJ, Brian Otten, the supervisory intelligence analyst over at the Foreign Influence Task Force that colluded with Elvis Chan and Joe Pientka at the San Francisco field office of the FBI worked with Jim Baker in order to censor everything related to therapeutics, to convince you that everything was safe and effective that was being promulgated by the illegitimate regime. Guess what? Those same individuals were on Crossfire Hurricane as they defrauded the FISA court to spy on Trump. And they are now subsequently going after him so that he doesn't come back into office and cleans house, because they're going to all of their heads are going to roll. And when you frame it that way, it starts to wake people up and say, oh, that's why. And so these indictments, when people are saying this on one side and they see the indictments, everyone sees it for what it is. It is the same corrupt domestic terrorist organization, FBI and DOJ, that is going after the only person that is going to do a clean sweep with his networks of this rotten corruption in DC. So with that, I mean, bottom line answer is the more people that we can off-ramp off of faux news and mainstream, the quicker we're going to get to solution.
I'm with you. And the more people like you that are out there giving their lifetime efforts,
I'm like 24/7.
time away from loved ones into this fight, and not just sitting behind a microphone or a phone, running their mouths and throwing bombs into chat and walking away, is yourself. And so I got a lot of love and respect for you for doing that. We those of us who are activists on the ground, who have been here for a long time, but trying to show what's happening in our world, really appreciate it. And I think that really we're at a point at this point where once we wake the public up to enough to really what's happening, it's not going to become about left and right anymore. It's just going to become about right and wrong. And it does feel like we're getting to that route, man. And just, from the bottom of my heart, as much as I have disagreed with you in the past, we have the ability to debate, talk, move along.
No, I think we almost entirely agree. It's just that one minor. No, I think we agree on the unilateral component. We just had to kind of flesh it out. I disagree with that unilateral vice president. But that was never my argument to begin with. And that's why I'm being thrown in with some of these other players that said that, oh, he could unilaterally just whimsically say, hey, I never argued. No one in my networks argued that. So I don't know what he's talking about. Mike Pence, anytime, 5 hours minimum. You're muted.
The truth is that Sidney Powell's argument and John Eastman's argument is also not for unilateral powers. It is a constitutional path to rectifying a rigged and fraudulent election. So, I just have hope that the truth of all of this does come out. And I think we made a good effort towards that today about how this all actually played itself out, especially Pence's usurpation of powers on January 6th with regards to the quorum call. We should have more talk about that.
He said, I can't do anything unilaterally. Meanwhile, he unilaterally disallowed a quorum. Total hypocrite. So I hope they bring me in as a witness, because, man, am I going to be this total wild card to what they thought my reality was in this conversation. We'll bring in all the text messages that I made. And guess what? It ain't going to be good for the DOJ.
Right. I think Sidney Powell and John Eastman welcome that opportunity to set the record straight as well. Ivan, thank you for all your efforts. Thank you for raising awareness. Sir. Thanks for being a patriot at a time when, man, do we need them. God bless you, brother. Thanks for spending time with us today.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me, brother. All right.
Cheers. Ivan Raiklin, you can find him at Ivan Raiklin on True Social, at Ivan Raiklin on Twitter. And, he's all over.